6. Installing external cables of the cabinet. External cables for the BSCB cabinet include the E1 cable to the DDF, network cable to the PDSN, and the network cable to the background. Cables between the BSSB cabinets refer to the interconnection cable between the BDS and the RFS, one interconnection cable connected to the PWS chassis and the E1 cable connected with the BSC. 6.1. External cables for the BSCB cabinet. The OMC Ethernet cable. The OMC Ethernet cable accesses the external background Ethernet for the OMP board. Each of the active and standby OMCs require one Ethernet cable, and they are connected to the same hub as the background OMC server. Both ends of the cable are crimped shielded plugs using 8P8C straight cable. An FTP Super Category 5 shielded data cable is adapted. End A of the cable is physically located at the silkscreen label OMCN at the RMPB backboard, and end B is connected to the same hub as the background server. Ethernet cable to PDSN. The Ethernet cable to the PDSN physically connects the A10 and A11 interfaces. Both ends of the cable are crimped shielded plugs using 8P8C straight cable. An FTP Super Category 5 shielded data cable is adapted. End A of the cable is physically located at the silkscreen label FEN of the corresponding RMNIC board of the IPCF, and end B to the same Ethernet switch as the PDSN. Ethernet cable to the AN AAA server. The Ethernet cable to the AN AAA server completes physical connection for the A12 interface. Both ends of the cable are crimped shielded plugs using 8P8C straight cable. An FTP Super Category 5 shielded data cable is adapted. End A of the cable is physically located at the silkscreen label FEN of the corresponding RMNIC board of the IPCF, and end B to the same hub as the AN AAA server. Network cable from the background to alarm box. The network cable from the background to the alarm box completes the physical connection from the alarm information sent from the background to the alarm box. Both ends of the cable are crimped shielded plugs using 8P8C straight cable. An FTP Category 5 shielded data cable is adopted. End A of the cable is connected to the same hub as the OMS background server, and end B to the Ethernet interface at the alarm box. Note: during the engineering survey, the actual length of each network cable should be accurately measured, and the reported length after the survey multiplied by 1.2 is taken as the margin for the length in delivery. Otherwise, in the standard configuration, each network cable is 30 meters, and each set of network cables is 500 meters. GPS feeder of BSCB. The BSCB is provided with two GPS feeders, which are two 50-ohm multi-strand coaxial cables and connected to the GPS antenna from the BSCB cabinet top. Installation of the GPS feeder is detailed in the description on the GPS antenna installation. Here, it is notable that the accurate cable length from the BSCB cabinet to the GPS antenna should be measured during the engineering survey, and the user should select another, closer antenna installation point if a single piece exceeds 100 meters. E1 cable. The E1 cable of the BSCB implements the ABIS interface physical connection from the BTSB to the BSCB and the A interface physical connection from the BSCB to the MSC. There are two types of E1 cables, 75 ohm and 120 ohm. During the engineering survey, make clear the type of E1 cable used by the client and confirm with them the E1 connector type used at the DDF, so as to select one from the following three E1 cables for matching. If the client uses a 75 ohm trunk cable and configures less than 16 DTB boards, select the H-E1-003 cable by default. If the client used a 75 ohm trunk cable and configures more than 16 DTB boards, and the connector is a CC4Y-J, select the H-E1-002 cable. If the client uses the 120 ohm trunk cable, we select the H-E1-004 cable. And A of the cable is a DB44 plug, which is inserted at the labels E1 1-10, E1 11-21 and E1 22-32 of the backboard RDTB of the DTB board, or the labels E1 1-11 and E1 12-16 of the backboard RSPB. Each DTB board can output one H-E1-002, one H-E1-003 and one H-E1-004 cable, and each cable contains 11 pairs of E1 cables. Collectively, one DTB board can output up to 32 pairs of E1 cables. Designate the terminal at NB in light of the actual situation of the user's distribution frame. Making method for NB terminal of E1 cable. Prepare tape measure, electric soldering iron, wire crimper, solder and electrician's knife for the use during the following procedures. Peel back the E1 external sheath approximately 14 mm. Put the cable tail cover, heat shrinkable tube and crimped tube on the cable in order. Turn the inner part of the shielding mesh inside out and peel the internal insulation layer to expose 3 mm of the inner conductor. Insert the core into the plug. Pay attention that the core wire must be inserted into the soldering pin at the back of the inner conductor. Solder it securely and trim the shielding mesh with 6 mm exposed. Push the crimping tube and shielding mesh together into the rear of the plug. Press or clamp the tube with a wire crimper. Slip the heat shrinkable tube onto the crimp tube, heat it evenly with the hairdryer until it shrinks properly, and then screw the tail cover onto the assembly. At the connector on both ends, test that the internal and external connections are conductive, and that none of the internal or external conductors are shorted. Laying technique for E1 cables. Bind the cables near to the plugs in an orderly manner, without twisting each other, etc. Attach cable ties at each row of cables at the same height and keep the cables straight, tidy and smooth. The E1 cable, which leads out of the RDTB backboard, should first go downward and out of the plug-unplug location on the back card, be bound at the back horizontal cable rack with ties, and then enter the vertical cable trough of the cabinet before exiting the rack. Based on the installation condition in the equipment room, cables can be laid on the cable rack or overlaid on the anti-static floor. When the cables are overlaid on an anti-static floor, the overlaying height should not be too high, to avoid that a proper cool airflow may be restricted. A gap should be reserved between the ABUS interface E1 cable and A interface E1 cable for future capacity expansion. A proper margin should be reserved for the cables before they enter the rack for the convenience of cable adjustment when organizing and tidying the routing. Different grades or sizes of ties should be used in different cases. Do not bind cables with 2 or more jointed ties. Cut and trim the surplus part of the cable tie after binding to the root, avoiding sharp ends that may pose a risk for handing later. The binding ties shall be spaced 3 to 4 times the diameter of the cable bundle. See the installation guide for details. Do not bind cable ties at the turning of the cable bundle, to avoid the inner core may be broken due to excessive stress at the bending position. 6.2. External cables of the BTSB cabinet. Interconnection cable for the BDS and BPWS. The interconnection cable for the BPWS chassis is designed with D-type 9-core connectors at both ends. If a BDS chassis is available, connect it to the BPWS. If no near-end BDS is available, connect to the D-type 9-core socket identified with BPWS at the RFS top for the BPWS. Interconnection cable for the BDS cabinet and the RFS cabinet. The interconnection cable for the BDS cabinet and the RFS cabinet connects all signals between the BDS cabinet and the RFS cabinet. And A is connected to the LRFS interface of the BIM4 interface board for the BDS cabinet. and NB to the BDS interface of the interface board at the RFS top. E1 cable. Together with the E1 cable at the BSCB side, the E1 cable implements a physical connection for the ABIS interface. The E1 cable for the BTSB can also be of 75 or 120 ohm. The 75 ohm E1 cable contains 8 channels of E1 signals, and 2 8-core 75 ohm micro-coaxial cables are employed, with the cable model as SFYE-75-2-1x8. The external diameter of a single cable is 2.05 mm. The 120 ohm E1 cable contains a 32-core 120 ohm cable with the model as PCM-120-16x2x0.4 SN.